Suddenly, the submarine is rocked by explosions, depth charges. One hit, and it might turn into an iron coffin for them all. Crash dive, the skipper yells, and they begin to submerge beneath the sea.
Hi, I'm Kylie, just another Army vet, and today I'm reacting to another World War II channel video. This is Life in a German U-Boat, a World War II special with Indy Neidell. Let's get to it.
It is just past midnight. The torpedo strikes the merchant ship right below the waterline. The U-boat skipper watches and confirms the explosion through his periscope, and a loud cheer grows up from his crew. But there is no time for celebration. Suddenly, the submarine is rocked by explosions, depth charges. One hit, and it might turn into an iron coffin for them all. Crash dive, the skipper yells, and they begin to submerge beneath the sea.
And this is why being on a merchant ship in World War II in the North Atlantic was a very dangerous job. It was so dangerous that they had U.S. naval crews actually escort merchant ships across the Atlantic Ocean, and you can actually see that in the movie Greyhound with Tom Hanks.
I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II special episode about life and death in a U-boat. On October 14th, 1939, the mighty British battleship HMS Royal Oak was sunk by the German U-boat U-47. The daring raid of Captain Gunther Prien and his crew into Scapa Flow, the home of the Royal Fleet, fueled the imaginations of many young men who then wanted to join the German submarine corps. They wanted to experience the thrill of the hunt, the promise of adventure across the oceans, and the feeling of belonging to a tightly knit group of celebrated heroes. Nazi propaganda hailed the U-boats as a war-deciding weapon, as a devastating tool that would bring the Allied war economy to its knees. However, they refrained from telling their recruits just how tough the job actually was. At the beginning of the war, it was common to join the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, at around 17 years old. After completing basic naval training, the U-boat recruits would undergo a 6-month course in submarine warfare. There, the men learned everything there is to know about the U-boats. Each crew member had to be able to recite the technical specifications of the U-boat type they were about to join in order to keep it running in top battle condition. Then they'd receive specialized training for positions at the engineer station or the torpedo room. The course was rounded off with a test inside a 5-meter diving tower. Here, the men practiced emergency escapes while equipped with breathing devices. Before setting off into the Atlantic, each U-boat commander would take his submariners on a practice war patrol in the Baltic Sea. Yes, submariners, not submariners. Quote, "The pronunciation submarine plus with stress on third syllable, submariner, is preferred by naval brass as evidence of submariners' collective lack of concern for the opinion of non-submariners on any matter. Many submariners refer to themselves by the much more negative terms of sewer pipe sailor or bubblehead. Submariners often refer to sailors that work on the surface of the ocean as skimmers or targets."
So I may as well add some Wikipedia trivia also. U-boat got its name from the German word Unterseeboote, which means undersea boat. And the number designator on each U-boat was the actual number U-boat it was. So for example, the first U-boat, built in 1905, was actually called U-1.
That's from Wiktionary. There you go. It was the final test to see if the crew was able to conduct tactical maneuvers and react correctly to emergency situations. Far from the home ports, a submarine can suffer from a wide array of system failures, one deadlier than the other. Diving cells could malfunction, batteries might leak and release acid fumes, or the air filtration system might suddenly stop working. Most of these problems could lead to the submarine plunging to the ocean floor without any hope of rescue. So the most important member of the crew was not necessarily the skipper, but the chief engineer. He was the one who knew the boat's ins and outs, and the skipper would always double-check with him and rely on his judgment when it came to mechanical problems. Such training missions were also important to make sure that crew and skipper worked together and understood each other perfectly. It often took synchronized actions to keep the U-boat returning from the depths of the sea. After successfully completing their last test, the U-boat would then be sent into the Skagerrak to leave for the Atlantic and the war at sea. The North Sea can be a harsh mistress. The winds of winter easily reached the force of a hurricane, with waves as high as houses. It was a tough job for the men standing on the tower, hooked in via harness, to not be washed into the sea. The regular crew members on board knew very little of their mission and just went about their daily duties. Everything was done in the most claustrophobic conditions imaginable. The men ate and slept in an iron tube for weeks or even months on end.
I imagine the showering and bathing opportunities were minimal, but sometimes all you can really do is take a bird bath, or they would sometimes just give you barrels of perfume to actually bathe with.
Constantly in close proximity with each other, camaraderie was extremely important, as there was zero room for grudges or other personal issues. That's why many commanders were strict disciplinarians. The main responsibility of the men was to make sure that the equipment was in perfect condition, clean, and ready to be used at a moment's notice. The rest of the time was spent waiting. Traveling across the featureless ocean for days on end can be quite boring. To keep his crew in shape, the commander would often use all the downtime to practice gunnery or emergency dives. Top crews could execute an alarm dive in just 20 seconds. Another thing is that traveling at high speed across the ocean meant they were also crossing into different climates very quickly. Moving from the cold North Sea towards the hot equator took its toll on the men. The Azor disease was quite common on submarines.
The what disease? Azor? What does that mean?
And sometimes the crews needed days off or an onshore vacation just to get accustomed to a new climate. War, however, would eventually call them back to action. Once the U-boat has reached its designated hunting zone, the submariners are on the lookout for signs of enemy activity. It's all about hit-and-run tactics for a submarine commander. The longer they stay inside an enemy shipping area, the more likely it is for them to be spotted and bombed. Once the U-boat commander singles out his target, he orders his crew to initiate the attack. Carefully, the boat submerges beneath the waterline, moving with as little vibration as possible, the skipper constantly observing the surface through his periscope, while the hydrophone operator keeps an ear out for propeller noises. The rest of the crew are basically blind to the outside world and are only spoken to through a system of loudspeakers and headphones. Hans Burke of U-61 tells us from his diary, 16th of February 1942. It is 1 a.m. and we are slowly proceeding towards the outer harbor of Wilhelmstad. The shore is lit up like daylight, and we are very excited and nervous. With a calm voice, the commander announces throughout the boat, "Make torpedo weapons ready." I am sitting at my station between the bow torpedo tubes, and I have my earphones and microphone on. The first order comes to me, "Make tubes 1 through 4 ready for a surface shot." Everything is all set. Exactly to the minute at 5 a.m., the first torpedo leaves the tube. It is running, and seconds turn into hours. Finally, a little jolt hits our boat, and hooray! A hit! A 4,000-ton tanker is going down. Suddenly, all hell breaks loose. Searchlights are lit up on shore, and we have to dive. After a while, we go back to periscope depth. Our commander explains what is happening on the surface as he watches. The water is burning, and the tanker has disappeared from sight. There are only lifeboats and fishing boats trying to save the survivors. A torpedo hit turns the ocean into a battlefield. Within moments, the water is covered in burning oil and pieces of wood and debris from the sinking wreck. But this spectacle, of course, immediately draws all attention towards the attacker. Searchlights and shells force the vulnerable U-boat into a crash dive deep into the ocean. If it gets lucky and disappears before the enemy can pinpoint its position, the U-boat can fairly quickly re-emerge and even try a second attack run. But if it gets damaged by shell fire or by ramming into debris, it must spend valuable time making repairs. If the sea is quiet enough, the crew floods the tanks so that the boat is balanced properly. Then a sailor puts on diving apparatus while the engineers go to work with the blowtorch. During repairs, the rest of the crew scan the skies, manning the anti-aircraft gun. A sudden attack by plane is the most dangerous enemy of a stranded submarine. Herman Fubrish of U-845 reports what happens if they get caught off guard. As the plane flew for the second time over us, it released many bombs, so close that the pressure of the explosions made our boat lean to port. I handled things by instinct, because in my head, I was concentrating on the maneuvers we were supposed to be executing. From the bridge, the captain yelled, "When the plane passes next time, we're going down to the basement." Orders were given for an alarm dive. That meant it didn't make any difference what came, we were going deep.
So I'm not sure if he's talking about depth charges or not, but a depth charge is a high explosive with a fuse that can be set to go off at a certain depth underwater. And if you ever saw the movie U-571 with Matthew McConaughey, there's a very scary scene in which they're being depth charged, and it was terrifying to watch, so I can't imagine experiencing that in real life.
The best, and often only defense of a U-boat that's been spotted is to sink deeper and deeper to throw off pursuers. Sometimes to a depth of 300 meters and beyond, below the distance guaranteed by the boat's builder. With the electric motor running at slow speed, they hope to get away unnoticed. If that doesn't work, then the only chance is to stop the engines and remain as still as possible. Cramped together, the men sit in total silence. Not a sound is heard, except for the popping and the groaning noises of the steel plates as the hull fights the growing pressure of the sea. The hunt can go on for hours, during which the depth charges keep falling around the boat, trying to land the devastating hit. If one explosion is close, the magnetic compass swings frantically back and forth. The shockwave might even knock the lights out. Then the training kicks in, as the men handle their stations in the dark by intuition and practice alone. Staying submerged for hours can be very unnerving, especially as temperatures can climb to 70 degrees Celsius, it's 154 Fahrenheit, inside the sub. For the crew, it is of course impossible to know if the enemy at the surface has locked onto their location or is just bombing the general area in the hopes of hitting them. Either way, there is nothing to do for the submariners but wait it out. Some take this chance to get some sleep. Everyone can do so actually, except for the helmsman, who must be kept awake with strong coffee and chocolate from the cook. But sometimes there is no escape. Sometimes the sub simply cannot outweight or outrun its pursuers. When air or electricity runs out, there is no other option but to emerge, often right among the waiting destroyers.
From what I read, typically a U-boat could stay underwater between 24 and 72 hours.
Recognizing defeat, everyone is ordered to put on their breathing devices and life belts. Often under fire, the men climb up the tower and down onto the deck. They stand ready for a last hurrah, 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 before they all jump overboard, and finally, the chief engineer scuttles the ship by pulling the vents. Like they have trained inside the diving tower, the men try to remain calm as they drop into the water. No swimming motions, only treading water to stay afloat. If they stay together, they might have a chance to survive if the enemy fishes them out. But chances of survival are slim, especially in the icy Atlantic. The submariners are now at the mercy of their enemies, and there are incidents where they are shot at or simply left to die, but most of the time, the Allies follow the rules of the sea. And most German submariners are treated fairly, often sent to prisoner of war camps deep in the Canadian wilderness.
So many of the German POW camps were actually really relaxed because there's nowhere to escape to except to the Canadian wilderness. There's just one camp, Lake of the Woods, Ontario, which actually allowed their prisoners to actually go to the local pub and to fish and to swim even. And because they were treated so well that many Germans who went back to Germany after the war came back and actually settled in Lake of the Woods, which is why that part of Ontario actually has a high German population.
The happiest day for a submariner is, of course, when he has successfully made the long journey home, returning to the safety of the giant submarine bunkers on the French coast after weeks confined to a U-boat. Is a liberating feeling, and there's often a huge crowd awaiting them, eager to hear of their stories and exploits. But the German submariners are in fact fighting a losing battle. Fewer and fewer U-boats are returning from their missions, hunted down by destroyers and enemy aircraft. Germany will lose 739 U-boats over the course of the war, and they will become the iron coffins for over 30,000 submariners.
So to put into context what Indy just said, but the total amount of German submariners was about 40,000, which meant that they had a 75% death rate.
If you'd like to see a special about the wolf pack tactics the U-boats use to sink the merchant ships, then you can click right here for that. It is very interesting. See you next time.
So as usual, Indy and his team did an amazing job. All I know is that of all the jobs in the military, being a submariner would be the #1 job I would not want. Being in a submarine is the stuff of nightmares, at least for me. How about you guys? Would you ever serve in a submarine? I'm going to direct you guys to my description box, and there I have a list of some recommended submarine movies. Thank you guys for watching. Please give this video and the original video a like. I will link it down below. If you do want to watch another World War II history video, then here you go.